Afternoon.
Welcome, Mr. Ellis. You have 5 minutes, and then there may be some questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, good morning. My name is Stephen Ellis, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on this matter. I appear before you as a human rights lawyer and as a Canadian citizen. And as such, and as a person deeply immersed in the field of human and constitutional rights, I'm greatly concerned by this process. If you would indulge me, I would like to point out that today is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In recognition of this important day, I think it would be appropriate to engage in some straight talk. So let's have some straight talk about this referral. This is not, as indicated, an inquiry concerning hate rallies. This is about the Quds rally and the Quds rally only. I saw no other groups mentioned in the documentation provided. Not a word about the myriad of actual hate groups out there trying to stir up hate. So why is there a focus on the Quds rally? The annual Quds rally brings together hundreds of people to protest Israel's inhumane treatment of Palestinians. Those who gather on that day every year express their anger over how Western governments provide cover for the Israeli regime at the expense of Palestinian lives. This is their right. The law permits them to rally and express indignation over a fundamental injustice. This is what freedom of expression is all about. This is why Quds is under the microscope. It is an expression of solidarity with the plight of Palestinians. So why does speaking out for Palestinians represent a problem for some? Sadly, there are some among us who don't want Israel's crimes to be exposed. This is what Quds does every year. It reminds the public that Israel's occupation of Palestinian land is an affront to humanity and a daily violation of international law. So let's have some straight talk about illegal measures advanced to curb freedom of speech on Israel. In the US, legislators are going to great lengths to curtail freedom of speech. They want to make it a crime punishable up to 20 years in prison for supporting a boycott against Israel. In response, the ACLU has launched a myriad of lawsuits at the state and federal level to ensure that American citizens continue to enjoy the right to protest. So let's have some straight talk about hate speech. Section 319 sub 2 of the Criminal Code makes it a crime to promote hatred and advocate violence. And over the past few years, a number of very prominent hate mongers have been charged under this provision. One question raised by the city clerk's office is whether or not charges have been laid under this provision with regard to the Quds rally of June the 9th, 2018. I can answer that for you. They have not. The June 9 Quds rally had no shortage of police present, and no hate speech charges were filed. Why is that? No charges were filed because there was no hate speech. In fact, I don't think anyone at any Quds rally has been charged with hate speech. So I ask the question again. If there's so much hate speech emanating from the Quds rally every year, why is it that no one has been charged? Why hasn't anyone been charged? So what is this administrative inquiry really about? With every day that passes, Canadians are increasingly demanding that their right to have free speech on Israel be respected. We would ask that you do not go down the road of unconstitutional measures such as recently enacted in France and the United States. Canadians have the right to speak out about the fact that our government is aiding and abetting a government that has literally killed thousands of unarmed Palestinians in the last decade. In fact, the United Nations Human Rights Council has just released a report stating they have grounds to believe that Israel has committed war crimes against unarmed demonstrators in Gaza. In particular, the Commission found that in the killing of 189 demonstrators between March and December last year, 183 were killed with live ammunition, including 35 children, 3 health workers, and 2 members of the press.
I'll have to ask you to come to a conclusion.
In recognition of the inherent rights of both Jews and Palestinians and the need to respect the principles of international law and the rights enshrined in our Constitution, Canadians demand free speech on Israel. Mr. Mayor, the only reason we're here is because Mr. Pasternak does not want the public to talk about Israel. Those are my submissions.
Thank you. Again, I might just start with a couple of questions, and there may be others. Thank you for coming, Mr. Ellis. Could I just ask you, in what capacity, you said you're a human rights lawyer, in what capacity do you appear today? Is it just as a citizen?
As an individual.
Pardon me?
As an individual.
As an individual?
Yeah.
Okay, but it's fairly clear to me from reading the history that you are not just an individual who happened to show up on this item. That
No, I'm very concerned about what's happening here.
And you, in fact, am I right, have been a leader in a lot of the demonstrations on all kinds of different causes that certainly take Israel to task for various things. And you've been the BDS, so-called BDS movement and so forth. You've been a leader in that.
That's correct.
And a co-organizer of many events and so on.
That's correct.
Okay. So given that you have that status as well as being here as an individual, can I ask you the same question I asked Mr. Lascaris, which is, you know, there seems to be some difference of opinion here, to say the least, as between what Councillor Pasternak read out and what I've read, and not just the song, but other transcriptions of things people said based on translations at these events, some of these events, including Al-Quds rallies in particular. Are you prepared, since you're here kind of as somebody who seems to be involved in the establishment, as it were, or the organizing committees for these rallies, to have somebody take a degree of responsibility that will say to the people of Toronto and to the government of the City of Toronto and to all the citizens of Toronto, and by the way, I would say the same thing to you if you were here, you know, as part of the Jewish Defense League. They're not here today, but if they were here, are you prepared to accept a degree of accountability that allows us to have a better degree of assurance than we have today, that this kind of language will not be spoken and not be sung, songs will not be sung at these events? Because we're talking here about people who are speakers, not just people, you know, where the sound system happened to be, you know, over there and somebody was mumbling a song to themselves. These are people who are at the microphone speaking that are alleged to have said these things. Are you prepared to take a degree of accountability as not just a lawyer, but as a person who's clearly involved in the organizing of these things and therefore to some extent in charge, if anybody is? Are you prepared to take some accountability?
I have a little bit of a problem with the question as it's posed because I don't. The only rally that I'm familiar with was the one that took place last year. Okay.
Had you never been to one before?
Just the one that took place last year. That's the only one. Okay. And what I can tell you is that there's no question that the words spoken by Sheikh Huda were taken completely out of context, and actually he was misquoted. Okay, because if you read predictably the Toronto Sun and Ms. Levy's article on the question, he was quoted as saying he was calling for the eradication of Israelis, which is actually false. What he called for was something that many leaders in the civil rights movement have actually called for in the past, and that is the eradication of unjust powers, unjust empires. He talked about the eradication of unjust powers such as the American Empire, the British Empire, and the Zionist Israeli Empire. Because it's a fact that the Israeli state presides over an occupation of millions and millions of people who have no rights. That's what he was referring to. And there's a vast difference between calling for the eradication of people, of Israelis, and calling for the eradication of an unjust power. I think you would concede that that's likely a big, quite a big difference in terms of the words
I will
spoken.
just say to you that normally it's politicians who are saying they're misquoted or taken out of context, you know, and so we're hearing that, and I guess I would just ask you one more time.
But I'll answer that if I can.
Let's just assume that you're right. This was a great misquotation and a terrible injustice, and it was taken out of context. Let's talk about the future, and from today on. Are you, as somebody who clearly thought you were involved enough to show up today, not just as an individual, as we've established, but also as one of the organizers of many, many of these kinds of events, are you prepared to take a degree of accountability that we're looking for as city governors to ensure not just this event, but that all events are free of this kind of hate speech? Let's assume in the past there wasn't any. But are you prepared from today forward to say, yes, I will, together with, I don't care, X, Y, and Z, other people, take a degree of responsibility to guarantee the people of the City of Toronto, notwithstanding whatever charter rights people have, that you will not engage in hate speech. Are you prepared to do that?
I think that's everybody's responsibility, and that's something
Well, I know,
we
we're not
take
dealing, I was asking you the
of course.
question, not everybody.
Everything-
I'm certainly prepared to do it, to the
Sure.
point where, frankly, I wouldn't issue a permit to this organization
Sure.
if they applied for one, because I think that there has been a track record that certainly calls into question, quite seriously, on city property. Anyway, that's all we're entitled to do. But I'm asking you the question today, whether you would be prepared.
Well, that's something I'm prepared to accept all the way down the line, and have always accepted responsibility for whatever I'm involved in organizing. So that's a responsibility I take very seriously. But what I want to say is this. I don't think it would be fair, and I'm not an organizer with the Quds rally, but I don't think it would be fair to hold some groups to a standard that other groups aren't being held to as well. So I think the standard has to apply across the board. And I'll also say that the tools exist already to deal with hate speech. I think it speaks volumes that nobody has been charged with hate speech involved in the Quds rally. Nobody. And there are more police there at the Quds rally than any other rally that takes place in the city. So I think as much as there's so much talk about hate speech, and a lot of this is blown up, taken out of context, and political, because the people at the Quds rally are speaking about the plight of Palestinians, and some people don't want that discussion to take place.
Okay, my time is up, but I would, as I reiterate what I said earlier, I would take the same position with any group that is saying anything that is categorized as hate speech. Are there other questions of this deputant? Councillor Pasternak?
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor. So I'm looking at a series of quotes over a 4-year period about shooting people, about glory to martyrs, said in both English and Arabic, said by multiple speakers. When you connect the dots, you're getting a theme. You're saying all these people are misquoted and taken out of context over a 4-year period, speaking at the Quds rally, calling for violence, shooting. When are we going to start shooting them? All that kind of stuff. They're all taken out of context, and they're all being misquoted.
Let me be clear. The only situation I'm familiar with is last year's Quds rally. With regard to the text that you're reading, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else for Mr. Ellis? Okay, Mr. Ellis, thanks so much.
Thank you.